House and car included, mother-in-law excluded. This phrase, popular in the 1960s, symbolized the ideal marriage partner and dream marital life for women. Of course, there are many respectable mothers-in-law out there. But mine was exactly the kind of mother-in-law I would most like to exclude from this world, a real nightmare. And my sister-in-law was no better. Susan, the sanitary pads are running low again. I am Susan, 29 years old, and the one who yelled was the mother of George, my 44-year-old husband, whom I married despite our age difference. Every week, my mother-in-law, Mary, would show up at our new home, check the sanitary pads in the bathroom, and yell at me if they were running low. Come on. I didn't want George to marry with such an age gap, but I tolerated it, thinking you would give me grandchildren. Why aren't you having any? But we had only been married for a year. George was my former boss at work. George, 15 years my senior, had been busy with work and missed his chance to marry, but he finally tied the knot after my persistent pursuit. Considering my husband's age and the time until his retirement, it would be better to have children soon, but thankfully, George, being a saver, had steadily accumulated savings, so he said there was no need to rush into having children. Plus, I had recently switched to a stable job with a lower salary, but with the possibility of returning after childbirth. So, I wanted to enjoy our newlywed life a bit longer. However, such thoughts didn't make sense to Mary in her early 70s. She strongly believed that a wife's role was to bear children, and, right after we returned from our honeymoon, she gleefully said, "I can't wait for the honeymoon baby." Unfortunately, I fell ill during our honeymoon, so that had to wait, but when I told this to my mother-in-law, she flew into a rage. "You paid so much for an overseas trip, and you get sick at such a time." Well, that's easier said than done. Originally, it was my husband who caught a cold, and then it was passed on to me. But if I said that, she would retort with something nonsensical like, "Young people these days just can't take advice from their elders." And then she even said, "Managing your husband's health is your job. Why did you let George catch a cold? You really are an incompetent wife." I was so fed up with always having to deal with this. You're right, I'm not a perfect wife, so I reported all of Mary's harassment to George. Initially, George, who only knew Mary's kind side, had trouble believing me. But once I recorded a conversation with her on my phone and let him hear it, he completely took my side. However, even after George complained to her, her harassment only became more insidious. For instance, when invited for dinner at her house, she would serve raw fish, which I dislike. When I couldn't bring myself to eat it, she would say sweetly, "You know, raw fish is rich in DHA and EPA, which are good for the brain. You should eat plenty now, or you won't have a smart child," and then whisper maliciously to me, "You'll have a stupid child like yourself." Then, the food she served me would be extremely salty. Young people's taste buds are getting dull these days, so I added extra salt to yours. Tasty, right? When I desperately drank water because of the saltiness, she would snatch it away, saying, "No, no. Drinking too much water dilutes stomach acids and hinders digestion." Meanwhile, my husband, all smiles, says, "Thanks Mom, it's nice of you to be so considerate of Susan." I do love how kind and caring he is, but he seems to lack a bit in the ability to doubt others. Especially when it comes to Mary, he probably doesn't even entertain the idea of doubting her. Then there was this incident. About 2 years into our marriage, George's salary started to decrease. Due to the recession, his bonuses were cut every time. When George casually mentioned this to Mary, she consoled him, saying, "It can't be helped, every industry is tough now, George. You're doing your best," but then she glared at me, saying, "That's why I told you to have children early. Raising kids costs money. What are you planning to do? You really are an unplanned wife." At that point, I couldn't help but retort, "No, I'm fine. I have my own savings," while giving her a sidelong glare in response. Afterwards, Mary and I had many confrontations that almost escalated, but I always restrained myself and refrained from telling my husband. I didn't want to put him in a difficult position by fighting in front of him. George often asked if I was getting along with Mary, but I avoided involving him and instead thought of my own ways to retaliate. The opportunity for that battle came sooner than expected. As usual, Mary barged into our house and, remembering that I mentioned having savings, started off with, you said you've saved up quite a bit. And then demanded, what's yours is your husband's, and what's your husband's is also his parents'. Tell me how much you have saved. Why should I? I just told you. And what would you do with that information? She was momentarily taken aback by my response, then said, you can't possibly manage money properly, can you? That's quite rude, you know? I am 30 years old, I replied. To me, you're just an inexperienced fool in life. That's why I'm saying I'll manage it for you. I'm fine, thank you. My savings are mine, not yours or my husband's. I don't need someone else to manage them for me. When I firmly countered, she yelled back, who do you think you are, talking back to me that? If you keep this up, I'll make sure you get divorced. Divorce? Can she really think she has the power to do that? And who do you think you are? Are you really okay with saying such things to me? I replied and left her house. The next day, she called me with a tone of triumph. Susan, you remember what I said yesterday, right? About divorce? I've granted your divorce. I've filed for divorce mediation for you. Not that I hadn't anticipated something like this and hadn't already looked into it. As she proudly informed me, I replied. You can't just dissolve someone else's marriage. If you forged our signatures and submitted the paper, that's a crime called falsifying an official document. Hearing this, her voice began to tremble. A crime? Yes, technically, it's punishable by up to 5 years in prison, I said, deciding to scare her a bit. Though in reality, such offenses often result in a fine, I didn't tell her that. Oh no. I already sent it. Turns out, she had indeed forged our signatures and submitted the paper for divorce mediation. Understood. I'll report this to the police then, I said. Wait. Please, don't call the police. It was just a joke, a little joke. Do something, please, she pleaded. It's not an exaggeration, it's a legal offense with established penalties, I told her. Upon hearing this, Mary finally broke down crying. Are you okay with having a criminal in the family? It was just a little joke. Please do something. She must have been really scared. Reluctantly, I asked her how she mailed the document. She used a service that leaves a delivery record, not regular mail. Since she posted it after 7 p.m. last night. I told her to immediately call the post office with the tracking number as there might be a chance to stop it. Following my advice, she immediately called the post office. Later, I heard that it was fortunately retrieved. At the same time, I rushed to the local court and filed a non-acceptance of divorce mediation form. This would invalidate any papers she had forged. Listen, Mary, if you ever do something like this again, I will tell George everything. I warned her, ensuring she promised never to do it again. I could have reported her to the police, but I hesitated to bring legal trouble upon my beloved George's mother. This threat seemed to work, as she behaved herself for a while. However, an enemy also scratches when cornered. She enlisted Lily, George's sister who had returned home after a divorce, into her scheme. Lily, for years younger than George, had been kicked out of her marital home due to repeated infidelities. Yet, this irresponsible woman dared to lecture me. Susan, when do you plan on having kids? I don't know how you can stand being George's wife without them, she said. I really didn't want to hear that from someone who had 3 children with her affair partners. Mary and Lily teamed up to call me a worthless wife and a barren woman. So I said. Well, George is already 44 years old. I read a study saying that men's fertility declines after 35. Even if I divorced George and he remarried, the chances of having children would be low, wouldn't they? Shocked, both of them just stared at me as I continued. And do you really think George would find a new wife? A house where a 70-year-old mother-in-law and a 40-something sister-in-law harass the wife? I doubt any woman would willingly marry into that situation. We're not harassing you. You're not aware of it? Maybe I should consider divorcing George as a test, I joked, and their faces turned ashen. If you do that, we'll demand alimony and a share of the assets. You said you had a lot of savings, right, Susan? Yes, about $50,000. Then I'll take half of that. I won't give it to you, I responded. Property division means splitting everything in half. You don't even know that, Lily sneered, and I laughed back at her. I'm aware of that. But property division only applies to assets acquired during the marriage. What? That $50,000 I saved it all before I got married, so it's not subject to division. And why do you think you're entitled to any of it anyway? They were speechless at this point. Oh, and by the way, caring for you, Mary? That has nothing to do with me. Best of luck. What? Taking care of parents is the wife's job. Not at all. The law dictates that blood relatives are responsible for care. So, I don't have to do it. That's ridiculous. I have 3 children, Lily said. Whether you have children or not, you can't escape your responsibilities as a blood relative. I smiled at the two of them, shocked and wide-eyed. Later, I told George everything. He became furious and unilaterally decided to put Mary in a nursing home. With George's savings from over the years and Mary's pension, it seemed they could afford the initial fee and monthly costs for the home. However, the home is over 3 hours away by car, so we hardly visit. Given her nasty nature, she seems to be isolated even in the nursing home. The family house is in poor condition, and now Lily and her 3 children live there, but it's deteriorating further with each hurricane. With over 10 spots now leaking. We've decided to renounce any inheritance, so the rundown house will go to Lily. It's over 50 years old, poorly lit, far from the station, and in a terrible location. Plus, with few necessary facilities nearby, even if she sells it, she won't keep more than $50,000 after demolition costs. Since Lily's divorce was due to her infidelity, she received no alimony. The father of her children is refusing to pay child support, possibly because they're not his. Since she squandered her assets, she got almost nothing in the property division, so her future looks bleak. Tough luck. I'm Rachel, a 43-year-old contract worker. My husband, Michael, is a 48-year-old company employee. Together with our 4-year-old daughter, who attends preschool, we're a family of 3. Since getting married, we've been living in the town where my husband's parents reside. We've been living a peaceful life blessed with a good community, but the only problem has been my mother-in-law, Susan. She's a stay-at-home wife and lives just a stone's throw away. I only remember her making snide remarks towards me. Looking back, she was the only one who urged us for grandchildren when we first greeted her after our engagement. Please show me my grandchild's face as soon as possible. At that time, I was nervous and wanted children myself, so I think I just nodded along. It was somewhat expected, given we live in a rural area and she's elderly. But after the marriage, her snide comments became more frequent, and her demands for a grandchild intensified. She even told me when my husband wasn't around that she was originally against our marriage. Rachel, haven't you got any news about a baby yet? Yes. But, you know, it's a blessing, so we can't really do anything about it. That's what young people say. You can't afford to be so leisurely, given your age. Right. After all, I was against your marriage. I didn't say it at the time because Michael stopped me. When we got married, I was 35, which seems to be the reason for her opposition. She didn't like the idea of me possibly not being able to have children or having a late pregnancy. Susan bluntly stepped on this landmine, saying it would have been better if he married someone younger, but she didn't seem to care. Indeed, I'm not young. But nowadays, it's not uncommon for women in their 40s to have children. And I think it's fine to live happily with my husband even if we can't have kids. I thought my husband shared the same view, but I've started to feel uncertain. What if he secretly shares the same thoughts as his mother? After all, she raised him, so it wouldn't be surprising if they shared common values. Come to think of it, we've never really had a thorough discussion about having children. Susan frequently contacts me for trivial matters. Being called upon often and living nearby, it's hard to say no. Every time we meet, she urges me for grandchildren. Moreover, it always comes with a snide remark about my unchangeable age. It's hard being insulted about things like my appearance, educational background, and career history, things I can't change. Even my every move is constantly criticized. What's even more unbearable is how she implies that my parents are to blame. As for my father-in-law, he turns a blind eye. He's more of a pushover than kind and doesn't assert himself much. Feeling depressed by the situation, I talked to my mother and friends, but there was no solution. It's been hard to discuss these small, day-to-day issues with my husband, so I've been silently enduring them for a while. My husband isn't abusive or violent, but he does have a traditional, dominant attitude, and rarely listens to me attentively. He's told me that he's happy for me to become a stay-at-home wife whenever I'm ready. I'm worried that if I complain, it might lead to me being forced to quit my job. But I thought I might become mentally ill if things continued this way, so I talked to him about half a year after we got married. I think he finally understood how cornered I felt, and he listened to me properly. About how Susan constantly calls me for errands. How I'm used like a driver, a delivery person, or a shopping service. Regarding the expenses, I've mentioned it before, but she never contributes, and we have to pay out of our household budget. When I brought it up one of those times, you told me to just pay for it, so I've been doing that. Did I? But, is it really that bad? Each expense isn't large. But it adds up, especially since she asks me to shop at least once or twice a week. I handed over a pile of receipts and bills I had been saving to my husband. They were from various places, a supermarket a bit far away, a home improvement store, various restaurants, a patisserie, a bakery, and a clothing store. Just the receipts I had kept amounted to a heavy stack. Including the shops in the shopping district that don't give receipts, the expenses added up to several $100s a month. In addition, there was the task of driving Susan around. Since I work, it's often only one-way trips. I'm asked to either take her in the morning or pick her up in the evening. Sometimes, it takes over an hour to drive just for her. Often, it's far from my workplace or in the opposite direction. The gas costs are significant. It's not an amount I can't pay, but it's hard to keep paying this way. Susan can live on her pension, right? Plus, it seems like she's always giving things to your sisters. What? Really? On weekends, I'm asked to drive less, but that's because my sister-in-law's family comes to visit from the neighboring city. Some of the errands I'm asked to do seem to be for my sisters-in-law. Like buying cakes on the weekend or sending packages to my sister-in-law during the week. I'm guessing, but given her attitude, I doubt my in-laws are paying when they go shopping or dining out with them. I think she also gives them gifts and pocket money for special occasions. I've seen such scenes that suggest this. But, you know, what really hurts isn't about the money. I told my husband, summarizing what Susan had said. I revealed everything, including the fact that she was against our marriage in the first place. That she said my husband must have wanted a younger woman, and the constant snide remarks. My husband was silent for a while before apologizing. I'm truly sorry. He then spoke sporadically. He wanted to marry me, and the reason was certainly love. He had no complaints about my age. His mother did express reservations before our marriage, but he strongly protested and she stopped opposing. He had no idea she was harassing me in such a malicious way and found it unforgivable. As for having children, he did want them and had even done some research. We've been married for half a year, so how about we see a doctor? I'm not insisting on it, though. We don't have to go. And we can think about it based on the results. Having children would be wonderful, but our life together is just as happy. I want us to stay together. I was already crying by then. As I sobbed, my husband continued, soothing me. He would talk sternly to his mother. I could refuse to do the shopping and driving since I had a job. He would check with his sister and talk to his mother, but not because he doubted me. He just wanted to hear their side. He trusted me and believed everything I told him. I'm sorry. I can only apologize, but please forgive me. And he asked me to consult him if I had any troubles in the future. Since then, the attacks from Susan have decreased. My husband's words must have had an effect, and I also tried to keep my distance as much as possible. Perhaps due to the reduced stress, we were blessed with a daughter in our 3rd year of marriage. Susan, predictably, made snide remarks about having a girl. Even now, she continues to blame me for not producing a male heir. But I no longer care, and I don't have the time to bother. My husband adores our daughter more than I expected, helping with transport and baths. I was prepared for solo parenting, so his help is a relief, but it's still tough. However, I'm happy that we can watch our daughter grow together. Then one day, when my husband was off, we got a call from Susan. Hello, Rachel? Do you have a minute? What's the matter, Susan? She asked if I was home, so after a moment's hesitation, I decided to answer honestly. Today, being Michael's day off, we were on our way to Costco. Oh, perfect. We're also heading there. Let's meet up. Susan probably knew that we shopped at Costco 2 or 3 times a month when Michael had a Wednesday off. She had mentioned wanting to join us before, so this seemed deliberate. Your parents are coming too. I see. When we met up, Susan was unusually excited, and my father-in-law was as inconspicuous as ever. I mentioned we wouldn't buy perishables as we had to pick up our daughter from her lesson afterward, which disappointed her. But she quickly recovered. She browsed, murmuring, this for Amanda, this for Emily, and even shopped for friends and neighbors, filling the cart quickly. I was surprised that she was shopping not only for herself but also for friends and neighbors. Soon, the cart was filled to the brim, and Michael seemed astounded. As expected, after thoroughly enjoying her shopping, Susan, before queuing up for the checkout, said, I'm just going to the restroom. I'll wait for you at the food court once I'm done. With that, she swiftly left, abandoning the overloaded cart and my father-in-law. Once she was out of sight, Michael and I couldn't help but laugh. We sorted through the items, paying only for our stuff. When it was our turn, Michael told the cashier, please separate the remaining items. They're for the person who's in the restroom. We left payment to my father-in-law, saying, Dad, could you handle the rest? Michaela is waiting, so we need to go. Please tell Mom. Okay, sure. Let's head home, Rachel. Yeah. There's a postscript to this story. That day, I received countless calls and messages from Susan, which I ignored with Michael's agreement. She was asking why we left and needed money. 2 weeks later, when we thought Susan had nothing more to say, my husband received a call from his sister. She was very angry. In the neighborhood, Susan was being ridiculed as a moocher, and my sister-in-law was also affected. I then remembered greeting a neighbor's wife at Costco's exit that day. Perhaps she thought it suspicious that we left my father-in-law with the remaining items. Mom and Dad didn't have enough money, and you left them there without helping? What were you thinking? My father-in-law had told the neighbor's wife that we paid only for our items and left them behind. The wife we met is known as the neighborhood influencer. With her sharp intuition and keen observational skills, she must have understood everything from our brief conversation. Michael sighed and told his sister, we've covered for them enough. Why don't you help sometimes? You always get help from Mom. I wasn't there. You're in the same boat. If you're so concerned, go and help. And just so you know, we never received any help from Mom and Dad. Really? My husband explained that we have received nothing from his parents. This was thorough, to the extent that we didn't even receive a wedding gift. Of course, we also didn't receive the benefits his sisters usually enjoy. Not even birthday presents or New Year's money for our daughter. My sister-in-law is not heartless. She seemed genuinely unaware of the financial situation and was apologetic when she found out. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I'll talk to Mom right away. After that, it seems Susan was harshly criticized by my sister-in-law. Even my father-in-law scolded her severely. Since then, Susan has become much quieter, allowing us to live peacefully while maintaining a healthy distance.